Welcome to No Boxes, Just Verses, the podcast where we go beyond the titles, beyond the resumes, beyond the bios, and we focus on the lessons that have shaped today's most inspiring leaders, all through the songs that have moved them. Each week, we build a playlist of a leader's life. 5 lessons, 5 songs, 1 unforgettable playlist.
Let's put the pedal to the metal, let the top lean back. I don't know where we're going, I don't know what we're running to. I'm checking for you, how you feel about that. I think it's time we rendezvous.
And today, we are joined all the way from Paris with a really special guest, the one, the only, my dear friend, Lola Oladunjoye. Lola, welcome to No Boxes, Just Verses.
Well, Shannon, thank you so much. I'm really, really happy to be here.
And thank you for agreeing to do this when it is clearly your nighttime. We really appreciate you staying up to be on the show and sharing a lot about your amazing journey. So before we get started, let me read a little bit about your incredible background. Lola is at the creative helm of Lola Fenhirst, and we'll have to get behind the Fenhirst part. I think it's a fascinating story, which you founded in 2020. Prior to founding that, you had a successful career as an intellectual property attorney in California's Silicon Valley in the Bay Area, working for some of the best in breed publicly traded companies, including several software companies. In 2015, you did a bold move. You resigned from your role as General Counsel of the Salesforce Foundation to pursue your dream of becoming a jewelry designer. And by 2017, you turned that dream into a reality and you moved to Paris. And that's where you join us today. So we really can't wait to get behind the story of how you took that leap, why you took that leap, and what you're working on today. So again, welcome to the show. And let's dive into it, man. Let's dive into it. Give our listeners a little bit about who was little Lola? Little Lola, before she was off to college. Tell us about the beginning of your journey. And I love the song that you picked kind of to describe those early years. You picked Last Last by Burna Boy. I'm like, somebody has Burna Boy on a playlist. Let's go.
I love that song because I think it really captures so much of the essence of being Nigerian, the slang for that is to say being Niger. It captures so much of the essence of being Niger. It's such an exuberant song. And it reminds me of my formative years. So I was born and raised in London, West London in Fulham. My parents were there because they were studying. My mother was in nursing school and my father was in law school. And I just was born during that period. And it was a time when it was a big time for Nigerians to be in London. I mean, there was a huge bustling community. And I would say our weekends were always the same. The house was full of people, uncles, cousins, friends, constant conversation, constant movement. Some weekends we would go to the photographic studio. We're always having our portraits taken. I have so many pictures of myself as a child, coincidentally, dripping in jewelry from before I could even stand.
Oh my God. Foreshadowing your love for jewelry, clearly.
Absolutely. When I look back, I see the breadcrumbs. But that song just reminds me of that sort of boisterous, everybody talking at once. It's all about community. It's all about family. That's how I grew up in London.
And when you were growing up in London, were you somebody who was dreaming of living other places, or just because you've traveled quite a bit? Like, where did that come from?
Well, so yes, I went to an all-girls convent school in Ealing in West London. I started there when I was 12, and I did everything there through A-levels. A-levels is like a high school graduation. It's what you need to be able to get into university. There were a group of us girls. We would always sit and talk between classes in the common room, and we'd always say, I'm definitely going to move to Paris and be like an actress or a dancer or a singer, or a starving artist living in Paris. And there were 5 or 6 of us who said that over and over throughout the years. We would always like, oh, you know what? Me and Bella and Gina, we can get a flat over here. And Sarah and Anna can get a flat over there. And for all I know, I think almost every London schoolgirl had those kind of dreams. Maybe Paris was our LA. I don't know, that kind of thing. It was just something we talked about over the years. And then I still talk to a lot of those girls, and it's quite funny. They get together a lot because many of them still live in London, but we still have a circle. And they say, and you're the only one who did it. You weren't supposed to actually do it. Nobody meant it. It was, but somehow I found my way back to that girlish dream. And at the same time, I started going to Nigeria from age 7. Every summer or every other summer, my parents would take me home to Nigeria. So they always wanted me to be immersed in the culture and understand my roots and identity. And I don't remember when I started hearing it, but very early on, my mother would say, "You're not English. I hope you understand that you're not one of these English girls." And just so that you understand and you don't forget, when you are 18, you're moving to Nigeria, and that is where you will do your university studies. I knew that they meant it, and that's what happened. I knew that I would not be living in England after I was 18 because they were strict and clear, and it was almost like a social contract. Do well in school, enjoy your life, but the condition for all of that is you're going to be at home. They really wanted me to be rooted in identity.
Yeah. It's so funny because, you know, you and I grew up continents away from each other. But when you said that, I could literally hear like my parents saying something similar in the sense like, I don't care about your little friends. I don't care about what your little friends do in their
Yeah.
household. In our household, in our culture, we do this and you're going to do this. And my father literally saying, you will go to college. You will go to law school. I don't care about those parents over there saying, find what you're passionate about. They're like, you're passionate about this.
Yeah.
Because I said so.
Absolutely. And when my mother would say, you're not one of these English girls, and I'm thinking, well, how was I supposed to know that? I was born in England. I mean,
right. You kind of are.
yeah, exactly. I didn't dare say it, but I'm thinking, I'm not quite sure about that. And I had friends who, not so much in my school, because it was quite a conservative school, but people closer to where I lived. And some girls from my school who were going into like fashion college, or who like, I'm leaving school and getting a job in a record shop. And then girls who had weekend jobs. It was fun. It was a cool thing to do. I didn't get to do any of that. So very early on, there was a path that I was being steered towards.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that. So that path, especially growing up, we both grew up with very strong fathers who were lawyers. Let's get into like this next phase of your life, because that's exactly what you wind up doing. You do leave London and you do go to Nigeria. I love this song that you picked. I actually forgot who it was by, so thanks for the reminder. It's Play That Funky Music, White Boy by Wild Cherry. And it's a whole vibe. That's a song that makes you smile when it comes on, regardless of where you are in the world. So take us through, you do wind up leaving, you go to Nigeria, and that's a whole different life for you.
It really is quite different. And I was not happy when I left, and I had been worried about it the whole year before. But I also knew that it was really quite inevitable. The only way for that to not happen would be an entire break with my family, which was not something I was ever going to do. You know, very traditional kind of upbringing.
Yeah.
And it was really funny because I had been there. So I left in July and school started in September, something like that. And by October, I can't remember ever having lived anywhere else.
Really?
No.
You assimilated that quickly.
Oh, yes, I really did. Not only that, I knew immediately that I would never live in England again, and I haven't. I knew that if I lived somewhere in the Western world, which I certainly wanted to do, it would have to be somewhere with almost a Nigerian type of environment. It needed to be expansive, lots of possibilities, lots of sunshine. I was just suddenly, I think to me, it's ancestral that when you now leave, you know, sort of a Western and almost a Nordic environment, and then you move to a place like Nigeria, and I'm from southern Nigeria where it's not hot and dry, it's humid and dry, it's savanna, it's forest-like. It was just so wonderful to be warm all the time and to never have to wear any kind of outer clothing. You don't wear socks, you don't wear scarves. It's always warm. My skin color changed. I sort of took on about 4 or 5 shades of darkness, which I really liked. I was like, I think this is my natural color. And I was like, I like this. So part of it was environmental, of that environment. And the other part of it was just, I'm not a minority here. I'm like
Yeah. What
everybody.
was that like?
I didn't realize it, but that's kind of what got me and held me. The fact that I was at a really big university. It was the second university in Nigeria, University of Ilefe at the time. And it was wonderful for me because that was my hometown. And in fact, it was my great uncle who had given the federal government the land for this university. When I
Oh,
was
wow.
there were 32,000 students enrolled. So it was a whole universe. It was a joyful place. We had incredible lecturers, but it was in my hometown. So at the weekends, if I wanted to, I could go and see my grandmother. I could go and see my uncle. And I just felt this sense of belonging. But beyond that, when I was on campus, everybody was like me. I would say it was 99.5% Nigerians at this university. There are a few people, the children of lecturers, and a few other people who were from Lebanon, Korea, different places, England even. But it was just an environment that everybody you saw was like you. So it's hard to describe what it feels like. I can't describe what it felt like to be a minority, but I know it was always there. I was the only one of my girlfriends who was Black. They were all cool with me and everything, but I was different. And when you're a teenager, when you're growing up, you don't really want to be different. And then to be in Nigeria, where the beauty standard was dark skin, curly hair, a deep voice, all these things that are just very typically Nigerian. I didn't realize until I had the absence of being minority that that was a weight and that was actually a thing.
Wow. So you really start finding, dare I say, your community. You really start getting into a great flow. You go to school there for both what we would call the college years, and then you decide to go to law school as well. And certainly you were predestined to go to law school given the parenting, and your dad had a really big part in your life. I totally identify with that. And so you do well. And take us through A, why you picked that song, Play That Funky Music, White Boy. And B, you come to a crossroads because lots of people that you went to school with are still there. You had to make a decision. So take us through that part of the decision. Don't tell us what the decision wound up being because that'll be your next song.
I really enjoyed my time in Nigeria. It was a real sort of becoming, but there are certain things I didn't enjoy. The fact that it's a little bit patriarchal, the freedoms that a young person would have in, say, London, you don't have them in Nigeria. Nobody gets to live outside of their parental home after graduating. So you're either married or you stay home. And so little things like that. When you're in university, and I was in university essentially for 10 years between law school and my under degree, you live a protected life. You get away with things because you're a student, no economic pressures. You're surrounded by your family and you have that family protection, but you also have some freedoms that once you're finished and graduated, you don't have those freedoms. You're not on campus. Like for me, I'm back in Lagos, and that means you're home every night by 6:30, and woe betide you if you are not. That's when I realized the university is a special time in a Niger girl's life. And after that, it becomes a little bit harder. You have to deal with a little bit more reality. And in the meantime, my brother had moved to California and I had started visiting. And I started to think maybe this isn't the final step in the road for me. This isn't the end of the journey.
And why that song, Play That Funky Music?
So I'd heard that song for a long time and it was a big one. We used to play it at dorm parties all the time. Almost every weekend there was a little party going on somewhere. And sometimes in between, before you get to the weekend, we would have BB parties, which is called a basic boredom party. And someone would just crank up the music and we would all be singing and dancing. So that song was just kind of a vibe because it was ironic and funny. We used to listen to a lot of funk, R&B and funk. It was Anita Baker, Luther Vandross, big bands like the SOS Band, Commodores. And then that song was just kind of funny. It didn't quite fit in. It was a bit of an homage to the genre, and it was not by a typical R&B band. So I always loved the song. But when I heard it on the next part of my journey, that's when it would just make me laugh, thinking about like when it came out and then now the context.
Right, right. Well, let's talk about the next part of your journey. You alluded to a little bit, and certainly the big giveaway is the actual song that you picked. there's a lot of songs about this place. So I think it is interesting that the one that you actually picked is called California Dreamin' by the Mamas and the Papas. There's a lot of California songs. There's Tupac's. There's a lot. So
Mm-mm.
interesting to me. I would definitely want to know why you picked that one. But big reveal here, the brother moved to California. So do you, which had to be really different from most of the people you graduated with in Nigeria who had a certain pathway, what they were going to use their legal degree with. And you had a father that was a lawyer who certainly knew a lot about practicing law, practicing in Nigeria, et cetera. So you had a blueprint for how you could have had a career in Nigeria for sure. I think it was fairly set for you what you could have done. But you decided to do something totally different and freaking move to California. And specifically the Bay Area, not even Los Angeles, the Bay. So take us through that.
Well, you kind of touched upon it. The problem was it was a little bit more than a blueprint. What my father wanted was for me to take over his law firm. His law firm was real property and traditional property rights. And it was the hard stuff. And I didn't want to do that. And a big part of it was I realized that one of the only ways that it would be acceptable for me to not go and join, because that's what you would do. If your father had a practice and it was fairly well known, you would join that practice rather than go and work, in someone else's practice or in a bank or something. And I think that was, well, I know that that was the expectation. And I really thought, no, I want to, I was never desirous of a legal career. And then I think my father and my uncles would kind of persuade me by telling me like how vast it was, how you could do anything. Like I remember one day one of my uncles came over and was like, "You're gonna have such a good time in Daddy's law firm." And I didn't say anything. And then he said, "There's so many other things." He goes, "There's mercantile law, banking law." This is like, trying to zhuzh it up. But it made me realize that if I was going to be a lawyer, which if I had been left to my own devices, that's not what I would have been. I would have been something really quite different. Maybe I would have been a writer, maybe. Because I did used to have strong artistic inclinations. I used to write, I used to draw, I used to do all of these things. And so I thought it was part of an escape plan. I thought I got myself used to the idea of being a lawyer by imagining myself in a big office. We would actually get to see, it was random the kind of things you could see on TV in Nigeria, but one of the things you could see was LA Law. And I was like, look at those skirt suits, look at these outfits. I was like, I see clearly what my next chapter is going to be. And so in my mind, it was something fun and exciting and in a place that was warm and beautiful, California.
That is the land of opportunity, so to speak.
Yeah.
So many shows, so much in pop culture was about come to California and all your dreams will come true. And interestingly enough, I mean, the impact that several leaders have talked about this, the impact that seeing something, especially on TV and movies, really gets into your psyche. I know exactly what you mean. I literally remember just thinking, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and remember seeing people that look like me scurrying around, women in these business suits going into these big buildings, and they just look so sophisticated.
Yes.
And they just looked so like smart and savvy. And I was like, I just want to be one of those women who has that briefcase. Remember, you still have to wear pantyhose and all that type of stuff. But they just looked amazing.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And in LA Law, they had a Black lawyer, they had a Hispanic lawyer. You could just see
Blair Underwood.
Exactly. Yeah. And Jimmy Smits.
Yeah.
And I'd always had a space in my mind where I would think about the United States. I think maybe about New York, but I'd also think about California. So when my brother moved there, he actually moved to the Bay Area. I knew nothing about it. I'd only heard about LA, but I thought this is going to be a good place to start. So I started looking into, I was in my final year of law school in Nigeria when I started looking into what it would take to qualify as a lawyer in California. And towards the end, or maybe shortly after, but I was almost doing it in parallel for a little while. Like I went down to the California Bar office on Franklin Street. I got all these tests from past bars. I thought, I think I can certainly do this. I found it really interesting. So I finished one bar, hopped in a plane, moved to California, and took that bar. And I found there was something about the American way of doing things that I preferred over the British way. we're all studying the same legal system. It's the common law system. So I didn't have like too much of a hurdle. But there was just something, I felt that the American legal system was quite dynamic.
It's definitely different. And so for our listeners, especially for those of you that aren't lawyers, a lot of the legal system in the US was based off of British law, as she said, the common law, unless, fun fact, you go to New Orleans, to
Yes.
basically New Orleans or Louisiana,
Mm.
which is the one place that is based off of the French law. It's its own type of thing. So lawyers in Louisiana study something different than we do in all the other states. But you're right, it's all kind of based off of British common law. So there's so many similarities. So that wasn't like a real high hurdle for you in terms of studying our law here. But here's a lesson that I want to just really shout out, because I've heard you say this before for our listeners. You learned early on, and it keeps weaving through your story, that delusional self-confidence is your superpower.
Mm.
You just believed in like things that most people, like if you went and tried to talk to somebody about, hey, I'm just gonna like go to Nigeria for 10 years and study, but then I'm gonna go to California and I'm gonna just take the bar, which by the way, California is the hardest bar in the United States.
Mhm.
And I'm not gonna train in like a US school where they prep you for that bar. No one in Nigeria is prepping you for the California bar. It's like, if you ask other people, they're like, that's crazy. You're like, yeah, well, my delusional self-confidence is just going to make me win. And it weaves throughout your entire story, quite frankly.
Yeah, thank you. That is true. And I sort of identified it a little while ago. I've always been this way. And I think it comes from my heritage. I think it's a Niger thing. I've noticed that people sometimes think of Nigerians as being a little bit over the top, a little bit too big, bigging themselves up, maybe a little bit boasty. But it really isn't. It's actually just a confidence that comes from, it just comes from the culture. It's across the society. I don't know what it is, but I know I've always had that. It's delusional self-belief because it's not based on likelihoods. It's based on something else. I was talking to my sister-in-law the other day about when I first got to, so I had taken the California bar, passed the bar, and then I got this magazine, and that's why I learned the landscape. They had this thing like top law firms, top environmental law firms, top corporate law firms. So didn't I just get a copy, sit down, put together a CV, write out application letters, and send them off to the top firms? The kind of firms where you were probably working. Morrison.
I definitely worked at one.
I
I
know.
worked at Cooley.
Yeah.
I worked at Cooley. Yeah.
Morrison, Pillsbury, Madison Sutro, the top, Oric,
Yeah.
all of them. And I sat waiting for them to like call me and ask me to come and interview. I'd never worked anywhere before in my life. So, and then one day I got a call and this man said, I'm in the recruitment department of one of the big law firms. He goes, I came across your application and I explained who I was and that I would like to come and interview for a first year associate's position. And he said, I don't know if you are aware, but in California, all of the big law firms, they don't really take people who didn't come through their summer program. So there are people here who went to the best law schools and then they were summer associates and then of those become the first year associates. So it's really not people sort of who are just applying. And I said, oh, I wasn't aware. I didn't know that. He said, yeah, it's really unusual to find someone who, who hasn't been here for a couple of summers.
That is very true.
And I said, oh, I see. And he goes, and you went to law school in Lagos, Nigeria? I said, yes, I did. I went to law school in Lagos. That's correct. And so he was like, wow. And before that, you went to school in England? I said, yes. He went, wow. And I said, so can I come and interview then? He went, and he said, no. He said, I was just honestly fascinated by the assumption in your letter.
Like the gall. He's like, I just wanted to meet this person who just thought this is how it worked.
And I said, oh, I see. Well, all right. Well, thank you for calling. And I hung up the phone and I thought, I'm so surprised that someone would call to tell me that I'm not going to be interviewed. But it's what you said. He honestly could not believe that someone would sit down and write such a naive letter. But I was full of naivete. And I think that really, I never got disillusioned. I was really full of this delusional self-confidence. I really was like, oh, I see. You don't really so can I come and interview though, nonetheless? He's like,
regardless of like what you just told me, that there is a whole process, right? Because I was a summer associate my first year in law school. I was a summer associate my second. You do different law firms, and they're vetting you, and then you get an offer. You do on campus like recruiting. It's like a whole process, and like you wouldn't have known that because you didn't go to law school here. How would you have absolutely known that? But what it shows, besides that delusional to self-confidence, what it shows also, you're definitely one of those people, besides being resilient, you're just one of those people that you will knock on 100 doors. And I'm not going to say you don't get discouraged. That's probably like a bit too much, but you still pick yourself up. The lesson is you still pick yourself. You'll knock on the 100 doors because all you need is one to answer.
Yes.
That's like that, like your mindset is like one will answer, something will happen. If I just keep grinding, it will work out, and it does for you. And so you actually stay, you don't give up. You continue to knock on those daggone doors and take us through, like, you wind up doing this thing that is like maybe not as popular for people like me who went to US law schools and top 10 law schools here and did the traditional thing. You wind up taking these roles in these things called software companies, startups. Back then, they aren't like, people are like knocking each other, beating on these doors to get these startup jobs. But back then, it wasn't like the sexy thing to do.
No.
So you were definitely like way ahead of your time. And so you wind up getting like a temp job or a contract job at one of these companies that literally like changes your life because you're ahead of your time, but you hit it when it starts to like really take off, especially Silicon Valley and these type of startups. You hit these companies at the right time and all of a sudden it blows up for you.
Well, yes, it came from the learning that I got from the fact that none of these law firms were going to hire me. Then I went down to the mid-tier, and even they weren't going to hire me. Then I realized what you've just described, that there's a whole process, that there's a whole system that I'm on the outside of. So I sort of thought about it a little bit. And then I met some lawyers who were from that world, and they said, this is a really hard world that you're trying to penetrate. And somehow it came to, they advised me, and I decided it was best, try in-house. Even though a lot of in-house lawyers they've done a 5-year block at one of the big firms, they said, you'll find a place in-house that doesn't require that. Like you're more likely to find an entry there than you are thinking that you're going to work at like a top tier law firm.
And what I will say for our listeners, it is unusual for somebody to go, when she says in-house, that means you actually go into a company as opposed to a law firm. And it is unusual to be able to do that when you're like what we call a baby lawyer. You're not that experienced. Like usually to be able to go to a company, they want you to have 3-4 years of experience. Like for me, I practiced at the law firms. I practiced at 2 big law firms. Then I went in-house to a big pharmaceutical company. Like that's like the normal pathway. But to be able to do that kind of fresh out of law school is kind of unheard of. Like now in 2025, that is not. But back then when you were doing it, that was not the ways. Like in the 90s and early 2000s, that's not the way people did it. But you did.
Yeah, I did. I was constantly networking, constantly trying, and somebody introduced me to the General Counsel of Oracle at the time. And I knew nothing about, I started doing some interviews at big companies like PG&E, some of them that were not necessarily private, that were quasi-public. PG&E, East Bay Mud, Kaiser Permanente, these are the big guns in Northern California. And then somebody introduced me to the General Counsel at Oracle, and I went down to Redwood Shores and interviewed with him. And he said, you come highly recommended, but I'd never really worked anywhere. So he said, but here's the truth. I'm not going to be able to find you a position within the legal department because you don't have that experience. He goes, there is a whole other world that does legal work that's populated almost entirely by lawyers, but they don't carry the title counsel because they make about half the money, but it's a good entryway. And I said, I'm interested. I'll do it. And so I think within a few months, I had my first job, and I was a contracts administrator. And that job was a repetitive job of learning the basics of the business of software licensing and putting together all of the contracts for the customers who were buying the systems. And it really was. And I got there and I was working amongst lawyers from all different schools. And that was a feeding ground into finally getting into the legal department of one of these big companies. And so that's the part I had to sort of change my original plan, but it was good because it was legal work. You were learning, you're working with the legal department. It was quite fascinating. It was a world unto itself.
I mean, so many lessons there. First of all, the whole relationship building and networking. You wouldn't even have that opportunity had you not been out there grinding,
Mhm.
just trying to meet people. And somebody decided to support you and give you a chance and connect you to this person. That's A. B, what would it look like to, so by this point in your time, and this totally resonates with me, especially when I made the pivot from leaving law to going into finance. And I'm looking at my peers who graduated with me who are now becoming like junior partners at law firms. And so you've got peers in Nigeria who are like really rising up through the ranks in the traditional way. And to many, it can look like you're taking a step backwards. It's like, wait a minute, you're taking a job as a contract, not even lawyer, but like as a contract administrator where there's lawyers doing the jobs, but there could also be paralegal type people doing this
Yes,
job.
absolutely.
You're taking like two steps backwards. And this is a lesson that several of the leaders I've been interviewing for this season have talked about, that sometimes you got to take two steps backwards to take three steps forward. And you got to believe that that will lead into that. And boy, did it propel you, because what you did is you went and you learned the business.
Yes.
Then you became one of those people that was indispensable about learning the business. So when an opportunity came up for you to get into a legal department of a software company, not only were you now qualified because you understood the business, you really were, again, this delusional confidence, you were now confident to like actually start going for those jobs, competing, and really being super competitive now for people who did the traditional stuff. Like, I went to the law school and I did the 5 years at the big law firm. Like, now you're competing with those folks, because what a lot of people need to understand, when folks are hiring, they are looking for people who hustle, understand the business. They're not just looking for the book smarts, because that's not an indicator of success, like in many respects. But people know they can depend on you. They know you understand the business and you got that hustle. Like, I'll take a
Yes.
chance on that person. And so you wind up getting your first job, right? In the legal department from that.
Yeah, I was in contracts, and some people used to call it the contracts boiler room because it was honestly like we would just work and crank and crank and crank on commercial agreements. You worked under a group of lawyers. And for me, I took it as this is an opportunity to learn. I got to work with 3 or 4 different lawyers who were managing us, and each had a different style. And you would sit in on negotiations, and sometimes you would be doing all of the drafting in real time while they were doing the talking. And I would learn and listen. And before you can learn how to negotiate an agreement, you have to understand every single line and clause and concept in that contract. You can only get good and nimble once you really understand your subject matter, like inside out and backwards. And I'm very good at being quiet and actively listening.
Mm.
And I thought, I'm here to learn and hustle and grind. And so there is nothing, and we worked incredible hours, but I was learning so much. And I was learning from people every step of the way, every step of the ladder ahead of me, and also working really closely with the business and understanding a world that I didn't know anything about, which was software. But at the time, this was the dot-com era. It was the place to be. It was all happening. It was a culture. And I was also learning about what it's like to be a young person living in the Bay Area. I just was in my stride. I was learning and advancing and moving really quickly. And I absolutely loved it. And then when I left Oracle, my next company was where I got a chance to actually be a lawyer, a corporate counsel, because of that early learning. At the time, we used to call Oracle Software University because it was,
It was. And so again, it was for, you took a chance, came to Silicon Valley, you hit it at the right time. Remember, at this time when you're doing this, the Googles and the Facebooks, they're just starting.
Yeah.
And here you are learning like the business of software, and the business of software so that you can actually advise people legally about the business of software. So the timing was just perfect. It was like, again, you were like, you hustled, you believed in yourself, you took a chance, and then there's just a little bit of luck. I'm like, you hit the timing, like, right. And so now you're really working at some of the biggest company. You go to Siebel, who are like really big in software, which winds up leading you. You spend like a decade doing this. And by the way, at this point, you've definitely done I took 2 steps back, but now I went 3, 4, 5,
Yes.
7 steps forward in a way where now you're looking at those peers, right, that you went to school with, because this happened to me, and they're looking at you like, oh, I'm so envious. Like, now I want to get into tech. They can't even get in. It's like almost impossible for them to like now move to the States and try to get into that.
It's its own beast. It certainly is its own beast.
Yeah.
And I got in at the right time and learned it. But I was also learning social skills. I was learning the people stuff too, because that was a big
Important.
part. Yes, I was learning that this is not London, this is not Vegas. It's a really different beast. And so my second song that I chose, which was Play the Funky Music, White Boy, that's when that became a really pivotal song, because we would have all these offsites and company meetings, and everybody would be standing around, everybody's being cool and relaxed. Play that song, everybody goes crazy.
Right. Regardless of where you're from.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't matter nationality, where you grew up, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that song, and they start like getting happy and bouncing the shoulders.
Exactly.
Singing along.
This is a real unifier. And it just reminded me of, I remember when this song came out, I never imagined that by the time it came out, I would be at a company offsite for Oracle in Vegas, where dudes were jumping off tables and screaming. And seriously, I was like, this is really, really interesting. Another thing I learned is, as I was learning all of the nuts and bolts of being an in-house counsel, I was also learning that, honestly, the most important thing about doing really well in the corporate environment is the people stuff, what they would call the organizational dynamics, learning the way that people interact with one another, learning the way that sales interacts with legal, that legal interacts with finance, that business approvals interact with other parts of, and just seeing all of that, I just found it so interesting. So I became really well versed at working well with people. And I think that is a huge accelerator.
Yeah. The soft skills are something you never learn in school. And so you wound up being in an environment. I agree that Oracle is such a good training ground for that, where you actually got to hone those skills. I was at a company that taught us that too. No matter what you do, if you understand the people that what we call carry the bag, that sell, that really, you could do anything. If you know how to do that and you understand those people, you will forever not only just have a job, you will forever be important and relevant to a company and to scaling and helping a business succeed. I know you got that at Oracle. You got that in spades.
And I got it all the way through to the end at Salesforce, because I remember when I was interviewing, and it was a customer-facing job, so dealing with sales. It wasn't strategic internal. It was dealing with the salespeople who sell the software to the clients. So they carry the bag. They're the guys with the number. And so the person who was interviewing me, he said, so this job can be a lot of pressure. You're dealing with A-type personalities. And I said, yes, I've dealt with people like that. I've always dealt with top performing salespeople. So he says, so do you get along well with sales? I said, yeah, I really do. And he goes, how? And I said, how? I said, can I tell you how? I said, I always befriend them. He said, really? I said, yes. First of all, they're the people that keep the lights on at the company. They're the people I have to work with. And they also know that they have to work with me. And then he goes, but how do you befriend them? And I said, I'm very good with people. And also I have an almost infallible memory. And this is an interview. He's looking at me like, huh? I said, yeah, I will remember everything. When someone tells me something, I remember everything they've ever told me. If they've told me the name of their spouse, I remember it. If they've told me where they live, I'll remember it. So sales guy calls me and he wants a favor. He wants me to work on his contract ahead of everyone else's, or he wants me to stay for a 5-hour negotiation. It's 4:00 in the afternoon. Calls me and say, hi, this is Jim. And I said, hi, Jim from Mawa. How you doing? He goes, how do you know I live in Mawa? I said, I think you must have told me. I said, didn't you tell us? He went, oh my. And we just have a little laugh about it. Or someone else would call me and I'd say, we talk about watching The Sopranos, or we talk about what people do on the weekends. And I would remember them. I said, did you have like baseball practice this weekend with Jonathan? And he went, oh my. I said, you told me that, right? And it neutralizes everything, because you're working with A personalities, people who push and push and push. You have to figure out a way to make all of that work. So so I said, I befriend them. I'm friends with every salesperson I've ever worked with. We always have a little laugh. We'll have banter before we get into the reason that they called me. I insist upon it. They go along with it because they know that ultimately they're going to get what they want. But I know that I'm going to get it with a measure of civility because I know how to talk with people.
You know how to talk to them and you understand their pain points. I always say at the company I worked at, they had us, even in legal and finance, they had to spend a day, if you will, or a little bit more than a day going out with the salespeople.
Mm-hmm.
And so, A, you develop a relationship with that person. B, you better understand the challenges of their job. So I think it makes you a better lawyer, quite frankly, because you now kind of firsthand understand it's not just theoretical, you saw it with your own eyes. And I think you got really good at that. And so you've already alluded to it. Kind of next on your journey is you spend a decade doing this, you wind up going to frickin' Salesforce, which again, you hit Salesforce at the right time. Like it is scaling like wildflowers when you wind up joining Salesforce. So how that came about.
Yeah, it was so interesting because I lived in Oakland, but I always worked down on the peninsula. So it was either Cupertino, Mountain View, or Redwood Shores.
And also the heart of Silicon Valley for folks who aren't from California. Like it is the heart of all the biggest companies, Google's, Apple's, Facebook is down there, are all like a lot of them are based in the peninsula. So you going into the belly of, dare I say, the beast.
Exactly. And that was a part of it. You knew you had to have a commute. Working remotely wasn't a conversation at this point. And so I remember thinking, I would love to work in San Francisco. And that Salesforce came about in, I don't know, 2000 when I was at Siebel. And because of the CEO, Mark, living in San Francisco, he is a maverick. And he said, no, I'm going to put my company in San Francisco. I live there. I don't see why not. So they were at one market. And I remember thinking wistfully one day as I was like doing my hour-long commute, because it was the same business as Siebel. It was CRM, but it was just in the cloud. And I knew a little bit of the cloud. And so I said, I'd really like to work at Salesforce because then I said, at some point in my career, I'd like to work in San Francisco. And I remember thinking, and now you have the Airbnbs, all of these different companies who native to San Francisco, but at the time it was only Salesforce in a very small office. And this is a good way to talk about silver linings and blessings in disguise. I had been at Symantec for 5 years, and then I got caught up in a riff. And it was a riff, a genuine one, where out of 70 attorneys, 10 got riffed on the same day. And I was one of them. And I remember thinking at that point, it's okay. I'll just take some time and think about what's next. And it was a really big dramatic day at the company when this happened. And I didn't take it as, I don't know, maybe I was in shock. I don't know what it was. But all I know is that within 10 days, on my drive home, a recruiter called me and she was a friend of mine. And she said, you know what, I'll be able to place you, your skills are in demand right now. She goes, go home, relax. I'll call you in a couple of days. Well, she calls me the next day and she says, I have an interview for you. This is a really good position. It's at a company. I won't tell you the name now. I'm just going to fill up some details, but it's in San Francisco. And in my mind, I was like, you don't have to tell me. It's obviously Salesforce. So there is only one software company. I went, okay. And then she goes, I'll call you back. And 2 days later, she calls me back. She goes, they want to see you. And that's the interview that I went into. I started that job, and this is unheard of in tech. I started that job 10 days after I had been laid off from Symantec.
Wow.
Yeah, I really did.
You didn't even have time to go walk around Lake Merritt and sip on a ice cream cone and just ponder life.
I really didn't. And I had been thinking, I'm going to do just that. I'm going to relax. I'm going to do all these things. I don't often get my hair braided, but I had been in Nigeria a few months earlier and I had these micro braids. And so I thought, I'm going to take them out myself rather than. So I start taking them out.
Oh my God.
When I got the layoff notice, I was like, I'm going to just relax and take these out carefully myself. And then recruiter calls her back and she said, they want to see you on Wednesday. And I said, okay. So I had started taking my hair out in the middle. So I did a bun.
Uh-huh.
I did a bun, right? Went to the interview and she calls me. She goes, they're calling for references, but that's going to go well, but they need you to start on Monday. And I said, you mean the Monday after? And she goes, no, the following Monday. And I said, May, I can't. I said, I've started taking, and this is an interesting note in cultural awareness or cultural dissonance. I said,
Yeah.
I've started taking my hair down, and I started in the middle, and now and she went, taking your hair down to where? What does that mean? And
She didn't even understand what it was.
and I said, I thought about it for a second, then I thought, you're getting the job that you dreamed about as you were
Right.
driving to Mountain View 6 or 8 months ago. They're telling you that this is your job. And she goes, what does that mean? And I said, you know what? It doesn't mean anything. I'll be there. That's fine. So a friend of mine who's a hairdresser, she said, between she and I spent the next 2 days taking out every one of those braids. She got me in her chair. I left her boutique at probably 11 that night to be at the job the next morning with hair that looked,
Wow.
because it was just so funny. I was like, I didn't even have time to attend to like taking my hair down. And that's how that blessing came about. And it really was a blessing. It was the peak of my career. It was it was everything I thought it would be.
The things we have to do, man. And agreed. I feel like you're right. Like now, I think more people will understand. Like, oh, you had braids, and you have to like take them out, and they're micro. It might take a little bit of time if you think about how long it takes to do a braid that's teeny, teeny, teeny for it to unravel. But I'm sure she was like, braids, like, you got braids? Like, I don't. So that was before the Crown Act and all the
Yeah.
things where
Yeah.
like hair those are some difficult years of just having to keep this hair thing up. I'm so happy now that people can come to work with the hair that they want.
Absolutely.
Doesn't
She
matter.
actually said taking them down to where?
Bless her heart. Bless her little heart. So, okay, the song you actually picked for this period, I didn't read it ahead of time. And I'm so glad you did. I was like, finally, somebody picked a song by this artist. It's All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix. You're the first person to pick a Jimi song, and I'm here for it. Why that song?
Well, by the time I got to Salesforce, I was still happy with my career and everything, but I had already had a declick, which was that I don't think that this is going to be it forever. I think there's more out there. I think there's a different way to contribute. There's a different way to be active in the world of work. And that has started happening towards the end of my time at Symantec. Even though I love the company, I love the environment. I've always enjoyed the companies where I worked. But I started to realize I think that I'm meant to be an artist. And I don't necessarily want to end my career sitting in a cubicle or in an office with artificial light, artificial air, sitting down for 8, 10 hours a day. I think it's because I've conquered everything in terms of I figured out what it took to become a really good lawyer and a really good negotiator of commercial agreements. And I just thought that I now want to do something different, which is sort of it can be a little bit of a scary thought. But I found myself bored with things. And I had developed a style of negotiating. I was really well known for my negotiating skill and my drafting skill, but more negotiating. Younger attorneys would sit in with me. And I just thought, I want to do something else. And then one of my friends who's at the company, but she was in DC, she called me one day and I was complaining about something. And I said, Hannah, I said, you know that song that goes, there must be some kind of way out of here, said the joker to the thief. And she said, yeah. And I said, it keeps ringing in my head. I said, I just think I want to be somewhere else and do something else. And she just laughed. She goes, well, what we have here is the JOB. It's a good JOB. She goes, but if that's the way you're feeling. And she was actually writing a book. I think the reason I confided in her was that she was writing a novel in her spare time while being a lawyer. So yeah, I love that song. I think it was written by Bob Dylan, but performed and recorded by Jimi Hendrix. And it just captured my awareness that it was probably time to give my right brain a chance to develop and see what could come of that.
And so where are you at this point with both the folks that you went to school with and like just that kind of cadre of folks and your dad? Like you, by all accounts, your Silicon Valley career is extremely successful in a way that I think would be, you just were at a different point than you would have been if you had stayed in Nigeria. What are they thinking?
Everyone's really happy and really proud, actually. Yeah. Some of my friends, one friend in particular, has done extremely well because she went into oil and gas and she's very, very well known and she's done extremely well. Others stayed in other areas, but everybody is quite prominent. They were very proud of me. They would all, and then, but this one friend, she was the friend that she came and she'd come on holiday and stay with me. So everybody would sort of feed through her, like, what's she doing now? What's she doing next? And she'd be like, people are not surprised, but are really, really proud of, your trajectory. And then she goes, I don't know what they're going to say by the time they find out what you're telling me now, which is that you're about to turn it all in.
But you're at a point in your life where when it started, people were like, what the hell is she doing? To now, it's like she went and did like the new pathway that was like unpaved by anybody in our circle. And now it's like, I always used to say, back then when I said I was going to stop practicing and I was going to do this, people thought she's crazy. She wasted all that time. Then I got my first CFO job and they were like, oh, my friend Shannon is brilliant. You're like, really?
It can be a little bit difficult to be somebody who's just not conventional. You can only be who you are. And so I think you and I share that trait. And I think I've always been a little bit, I'm certainly very stubborn and bloody minded. Like if I want to do something, then it's going to be done. And I let people catch up with me.
I love that. I let people catch up with me. And this is what this podcast is about. No boxes. It's like, I'm trying to normalize no boxes. You can be unconventional and still be super successful. And so you wind up being very successful. You're at Salesforce. And then you do something a little, at first, I'm sure it's a little like people think, oh, she's just trying to quench this like desire to be creative. It's like a little hobby, dare I say that. I think someone actually said that to you. But you start taking jewelry making classes. I mean, everybody winds up, as you get up in your corporate career in particular, you start finding things that bring you joy. I started doing Zumba. I make films. Like you just do these things. And people, for the most part, give you a little bit of latitude because they think it's just kind of hobby-ish. And you're still going to do the job. But take us through no, you actually kind of started having a plan. And then I know your father was a big part of your life. I wasn't sure in your journey where your father wound up, being deceased. I know for me, when it happened, it was a very big unlock that I really needed to do really what I wanted to do, even if it wasn't what my father wanted, because he was now gone. And it really, for me, solidified more of just how fragile and short life is and how I'd be kicking myself if I didn't dive into the stuff that made me happy.
I mean, that's certainly true. One thing is I always listen to myself and I don't mute my inner voice. And so, I think I got the job. I was doing really well and I was in San Francisco and it was so incredibly fun and it was dynamic. And I suppose Salesforce at this point was what Oracle was. And 10 years before IBM was, it was the company. It just simply was. It was the coolest, the fastest growing, everything. And I remember thinking, this is all really great, but there has been a certain declic. And I want to go back to being the artist that I was when I was a child, really. There's a quote from Pablo Picasso, and it goes something like, the first half of life is learning to be an adult, and the second half of life is learning to be a child again. I just decided I wanted to, I don't know where it came from, and it was a voice outside of me that said, you've accomplished this. You are right at the top of an improbable career that you created. You do it really well, but the next step is to keep rising and to become an executive, like to be a general counsel, maybe of a publicly traded company, or you could actually do something else. And I've never been afraid of wanting to do something else. And I think, I said, I think I've reached the end of this particular journey because, I learned a lot. By this point, I'm at Salesforce. I've moved from the main company to the Salesforce Foundation, and I'm there as the general counsel, which is by any way you want to slice it, that is the top of the legal chain. You have now arrived. You're at a C-level position. It was by hard work. It just simply happened that way. And I was happy that it happened, but by the time I got there, I had already decided that this is not going to be the last thing that I do. And I thought about it and I said, it's a really elevated position. However, there are a few hundred people that could be in this position because that's just the way it is. You just have to be a really good lawyer. And there are thousands of really good lawyers in California and multiple thousands in the United States. And I said, but I have these visions of what I could do if I became a creative, if I allowed myself to be an artist. And I'm pretty sure that I could compete shoulder to shoulder with the best jewelers, because jewelry was my medium, the best jewelers in the world. But even if that turns out not to be the case, because I had visions of what I could create. So even if it's not perceived as being the best, I'm the only one who can do it. I'm the only one who can do my version of being a jewelry designer. So if one paints, what I paint is going to be different from what you do, what your child does, because it's individual. It's something that comes from the hands, it comes from the soul. So whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, I am the only one who can bring my artistry to the world. And I thought, and since I already know that it's going to be absolutely incredible, it would be wrong of me to deprive the world. I'm just being facetious. But I just thought, no, I mean, I'm the only one who can do this. I know it's going to be something that is going to have impact. I know I'm going to create a new genre. I know it's going to be different, but it's going to be quite remarkable. And if I don't do it, it won't ever be done because no one can do it. One's art is individual. It's like your thumbprint. So either I do this and take my chances, but I know, that confidence, which is Delulu confidence. I know, but if I don't do it, no one else will. It will be gone from the world. The possibility will be gone. And I was joking with a friend and I said, you know what? I can't stand those people who always say, oh, I was going to do that. I was going to do that. I could have done that. Like this is when I was at Symantec, I was sitting with my manager, who was a good friend of mine. And there was a sales guy he was one of those people who like plays a lawyer on TV. He would jump in and be like, what about if we could just say all reasonable efforts? You know, he thought that it was just that simple. And she goes, you notice that he wants to be a lawyer. And I said, oh, you haven't been there when he says it at the beginning of almost every negotiation. I was supposed to go to law school. Or I was going to go to law school. And Max was like, but if you didn't go, there's no point in saying it. What is the import of that statement? I was going to go to law school. So I don't want to be one of those people who I could have been a world-class jeweler. So you either do something or there's nothing to talk about. So I said, I think I'm going to do this.
Ooh, that's deep. So you were channeling that because you start taking these classes. Like you're serious. You're like, no, I'm going to do this. And you've taken these classes for a while, which is amazing. You're still doing your job. You're still, you're General Counsel of Salesforce Foundation. And then you go to your boss and you say, I'm going to resign.
Yeah. So I made my decision in my mind, but I wasn't sure exactly what my medium was going to be. So I start taking classes. There's an art school very near my house called California College of the Arts, and it's a brilliant art school. So I would take evening classes there. I took textiles, I took sketching, sculpting. One day I saw that there was a class in silversmithing. And I thought, it was silversmithing and jewelry design. I took that class and it was like walking through a one-way mirror. Like there is no going back. The only question is, how far do you carry on? But you never come back to who you were before that. And I just loved everything about it. And I said, this is what has been haunting my dreams. I'm going to create iconic adornment jewelry. So I take introduction to jewelry design, and then I take intermediate, then the school year is over. It's September, 2 months later, I look at the curriculum and they don't have anything new. So I said, I think I need to take introduction again. I think there are a couple of things that I could stand to be refreshed upon.
Wow.
Yeah, so I go back and I take introduction, and it's the same instructor. So he's going through all the things he said before and he's asking questions like he said a year ago or 8 months ago. Does anyone know? So when you're melting copper and then you want to add some nickel because you want to do an alloy that you're going to mix with gold, does anyone know what the heat point ratio is? And I'd say, I think I do. And I would answer. He's like, yeah, great. 15 minutes later, he asks another question. I shoot my hand up and he's like, right. So then we get onto our practical. He comes over and he says, you're being a little bit disruptive. And I said, I know. I said, let's talk after the class. After the class, I struck a deal with him where he would come and teach me on a Saturday afternoon after he would teach at the college in the morning. He'd come to my place. The first thing he would do is set up a studio in my basement, a jewelry studio. And then he would come and teach me one-on-one for like 4 hours. So we did that for a year because I needed all the attention and I needed the one. And it was amazing. I learned how to actually manipulate metal and make jewels.
Talk about betting on yourself, putting in, this wasn't like you were waiting for your company to pay for you to get this training. You put your own money and your own time into it because you loved it.
Yeah, it was fascinating.
And you wanted to be the best.
Yeah. So then after a year, we were done with all of that. And by now I had started, people were interested, a colleague and someone in engineering at Salesforce wanted me to make her engagement ring, which was a huge honor.
Wow.
People were liking what I was doing. And I said, you know what? It's time. I had already been saving and I had this vision that I was going to start my company and be successful within a year. Again, the Delulu. But I had a plan and I had told the person I reported to, who was the CFO of the foundation, I had told him in mid-year planning that for the next fiscal year, we should be looking for someone to take this position because I was going to resign and do something else completely. Get to that point where the bonus is paid out. We're having the first one-on-one after bonus payout. And so I said, this is it. This is the day. I said, I'm handing in my notice. The very first words he said, what do you mean? Immediately after he said, what do you mean? He said, I can get you more money because I can get you more money and more headcount. And I said, oh, but it's not about that. I said, right. I've been asking for more headcount, so that would be great. I said, it's not about the money. I said, but more importantly, I told you this. I told you 6 months ago that I was going to, as soon as the first quarter was over, I was going to resign and do something else. I said, remember I told you I was going to become a jewelry designer. I was going to set up my own company. He just gave me this look of it was abject, sheer pity. He went, oh yeah, I do. And I remember thinking, I've seen that look before. I've seen that look on people's faces when I would say, I'm taking the California bar 2 months after I've taken the Nigerian bar. I've seen that look on people's faces or I've heard it on the phone when the recruiter from McCutcheon Doyle calls me to say, you actually think that you can get a job here by writing this kind of, little letter. I've heard it over and over again. It never phases me. It was in that moment that I said, he has no idea that whether it's a year from now, maybe a little bit more than a year from now, I'm going to be famous. I know that I'm going to be able to do this at the very highest level.
I think you told me that he literally kind of thought that you were going to set up, no disrespect to Etsy, but a little Etsy shop where you were going to just be selling these things on the side, going to county fairs or something and setting up a little booth.
When I told him I was going to become a jewelry designer, I know from the look that I was seeing on his face that he had in his mind, he pictured me sort of every Saturday morning getting in my car and driving down to Michael's and buying beads and stringing them together and, maybe getting a glitter gun. Because women go through these phases, I guess. I don't know. But he did not see that would lead to me resigning and that he didn't see the vision that I had in my mind. And so the next conversation was, I can't do without you. So I ended up staying 6 more months, 6 months longer than I wanted to. But by then it was just in terms of finding someone, doing the transition. And eventually I left. And then 18 months after I left, I moved to Paris to help make that dream more real.
It finally happened. So next up, you moved to Paris. You finally have done the childhood dream that you and your girlfriends had. You actually moved to Paris. You set up shop. You got to do a lot of networking. And so, you had your highs and lows. But what I love about it is you continue to grind. The song that you had picked just for this whole period is called Free by Denise Williams. And it makes so much sense because now you are free and just doing something that you talked about in your childhood, finally. And so take us through, now you're in Paris and you get a big break that actually, eventually, now you've been in the New York Times. You'll talk about what you're working on next, but it involves Sotheby's. But tell us about that big break that happened.
Yes, I moved here and I had a few pieces of jewelry I had 12 pieces actually, which I thought was enormous. I just couldn't even believe I had 12 pieces. I thought it was a collection. I would go to retailers and they would be like, that's not a collection. you need at least 36 pieces to fill a 12-inch case.
Just like when you came to California, right? You had same thing. You were just like, I'm just going to make it happen. And people are like, wait a minute, this is not how this works. You're like, oh.
So I got a lukewarm reception, but I was like, no, I'm not taking the no. And then a friend of mine said to me, there's a guy who has a little store. He used to be at Colette, and Colette was the first concept store in the world. It was huge. It was the center of Paris fashion. During Paris Fashion Week, everybody would go there. And they had a lot of famous clients. And so she said, the guy who used to do jewelry and watches at Colette has started his own thing because it's just closed. You should go talk to him. I go talk to him. He asks to see what I have. I show him. He says, okay, look, it looks good to me. He goes, I can't buy this collection from you because I'm new. I'm just starting out. If you want to consign some pieces to me, give them to me. I'll move them for you. So I said, sure, okay. So I gave him the whole collection. I gave him all 12 pieces. And I let it be. And then less than 2 months after I gave them to him, he sends me a text. And I'm in front of my house waiting for the bus. And he sends me a long text. And he says, hello, Lola. Yes, you need to give me your tax invoice. And then we need to know this. And then whenever you put in an invoice, remember to do this and make sure that all the SKUs are correct. And I was like, okay. Yeah. And I'm thinking, this is boring. Okay, all right. And it's one of those texts that's so long that the second paragraph comes in it. So I click on the second paragraph. And then he says, oh, and by the way, I was able to sell one of your pieces. He goes, I sold the diamond ring to somebody who's a good friend of ours. He goes, he's quite famous. You might know him, Mr. Karl Lagerfeld. And the diamond ring was it was the cherry of the collection. And one thing I've always done, people talk about it a lot nowadays, is express joy. Like, don't mute the joy. So I start whooping up and down on the pavement. And I was like, if anybody sees me and they think that it doesn't matter, I started going, yeah.
I just need people to understand, you're talking Karl Lagerfeld as in the German fashion designer, artist, photographer, known for his role as the creative director of, I don't know, Chanel and Fendi, like that Karl Lagerfeld.
Yeah. I was filled with joy. And when I got over the whooping, when people were looking at me and laughing and being, ça va? Oui, ça va. Ça va génial, quoi. I said to myself, I knew it. First of all, number one, I knew that my stuff was good. And also I knew that I could sell to men. That had been a question in my mind before. And as part of why I moved here, I wanted to sort of elevate in a way. I had an idea in my mind of what the brand could be. And it was something, I think, bigger than it would have been if I had stayed.
Let's just face it. This is your whole life in your career. You went to Silicon Valley because you wanted to work in tech. And you're like, I gotta be where it is. You wanted to work in high-end luxury and jewelry design, fashion. Where else can you go but maybe New York, but it's Paris.
Yeah.
You go to where the action is. You bet on yourself and you just go to where the action is and it works out.
Yeah.
Again, in the beginning especially, you have to learn a lot. Your learning curve is steep. You make a ton of mistakes. But you also have that delusional confidence that says, I'm going to get knocked down and up the next day. And there's ups and downs, but I still believe that I'm going to be successful. And that's just been your whole trajectory. So it doesn't surprise me that you wind up getting this break with Karl Lagerfeld and then you wind up coming up with collections. And then it leads to, I wound up meeting you at one of your shows in Martha's Vineyard and I got this lovely ring. I'm sorry for the people who are listening and can't see the video podcast. That's why you should go to YouTube and watch it. But here's one of the rings that I bought. You have an amazing collection of jewelry.
Thank you.
And so now you're at the point where you've been featured in the New York Times. You have something coming on Sotheby's. Tell us what's up next for you.
Yes, it's been a really good season. As you said, I've been featured in Vogue many times. I've written articles for Vogue. I have done exhibitions with Sotheby's, 3, and I'm going to be doing another one in September. This exhibition is to celebrate the launch of a new book by Phaidon called The Jewelry Book. And it's a book, it's sort of the encyclopedia of contemporary jewelry. It outlines 200 of the biggest contributors to both the history and the future of contemporary jewelry. And I was surprised and honored to be included in those ranks. And so Sotheby's is doing an exhibition featuring 20 of the 200 jewelry designers. And then I end up being one of those 20. And so a picture of some of my work is featured in the New York Times because the New York Times did an article on the book and the exhibition. So that's where we are.
Wow. So Lola, I mean, you've got a lot going on. We want to know how we can support you, where we can find you, definitely where we can find the jewelry. And then I want you to tell us that one song that if you were walking down the street in Paris, Paris is so fabulous, and it came on, you would just smile.
Well, yeah, so thank you very much. Where you can find me is online. My website, lolafenhirst.com. All my styles are available there. We ship worldwide. That's where you can learn more about what's new, what is going to be in the upcoming collections. Because ultimately, the pieces that I put out, they're all about storytelling. Each of them has a story, a history, and talk about identity. And they tell about the journey and they speak of the history and the provenance. So I think that's what has been able to set me aside. And yeah, I'm very, very happy that I listen to that inner voice. I don't drown it out.
And look, and I love it. Put your ring up. Put your ring up. I'll put mine up. Look how gorgeous these rings are. You make other things too. Earrings. You make a whole bunch of stuff. I started with the ring, but the next up, I think I'm looking for an earring. So we'll have to talk about that. If you're ever in Paris, definitely reach out. I can tell you firsthand that Lola is an expert on all things Paris, especially luxury things, Paris, and museums, you name it, can really show you a good time. So definitely look her up. Lola, I still need your happy song.
Well, it will be something from Kendrick. And I think, yeah, he did an album a few years ago called Damn. That is such a beautiful album in terms of like, it's a real old album, like back in the 70s where everything was a suite, like the way Isaac Hayes used to do his albums. I almost don't know the songs separately, if you know what I mean, because but the one I really love is called Humble.
I like that song. I love it. We have had such I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. You have such an amazing and inspiring career. You're really reaching. There's a lot of people out there today who want to make a leap of faith. And I hope they feel encouraged by your story because you've made several leaps of faith and you're not done.
No, not by any means.
Not by a long shot. And so I know that this story resonates with somebody, like several people out there. So thank you so much for your time. Look, we're going to do a recap of your playlist. I love your playlist. It is really a whole vibe. First up was Last by Burna Boy.
Mm-hmm.
Next is Play That Funky Music, White Boy by Wild Cherry. Next is California Dreaming by the Mamas and the Papas. That's followed by All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix. Your last song was Free by Denise Williams. It's such a beautiful song. And then we ended with the bonus song of Humble by Kendrick Lamar. That's a playlist that definitely I could see using for my next kind of like walk around the block with the dog or going to the airport. Like it's got all the elements just like you do. So Lola, thank you so much for your time. We've really enjoyed having you on No Boxes, Just Verses.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really enjoyed the chat.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening to No Boxes, Just Verses. And if this episode moved y'all, please share it, rate us, follow the show on your favorite platform, and we can keep building our leadership playlists together. So you can find me, guys, on Instagram as Shannon Nash 1 and No Boxes, Just Verses on Instagram. You can also find me on LinkedIn as Shannon Nash ESQ CPA. You can also find No Boxes, Just Verses on LinkedIn. You can visit our website at noboxesjustverses.com. Finally, don't forget to check out the show notes. The show notes are super important because this is where the playlists will live. You will be able to get these playlists on Apple and Spotify. You'll also be able to follow up and see how to reach out to the guests, follow them, and support them. Until next time, I need you to stay unboxed. You come for the stories, but you stay for the playlists. I'm Shannon Nash, and I'm out.